You're listening to the Podcast Detroit Network. Visit www.podcastdetroit.com for more information.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 19 of Storyteller Conclave. This is a show all about helping you run the best tabletop role-playing game that you can. Whether you're new as storyteller or dungeon master learning the craft, or an experienced storyteller looking to take your game to the next level. I am Sara.
I'm Rob.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
How was vacation?
It was really nice.
Yeah?
Yeah. I went with three other guys. We basically stayed at a really nice. I mean, when I say really nice, I mean really, really nice. Cabin house. It was a lake house, and we all had our own rooms, which had way too much space in them. And there was a turret and a fire pit place, and like a kitchen bigger than the kitchen at my own house.
By turret, you mean tower, not like mounted 50 cal.
Correct.
Okay, good.
But still, like we went up there and like enjoyed sitting and staring at the, at the dusk while sipping whiskey. I mean, it was incredible. We had a great time.
Ideal.
It was nothing. Like last year we did Gen Con together, and this year we were like, let's take it down a notch. Let's just kind of relax this out. And so we just played games and hung out and had a really nice time. It was beautiful.
Did some role playing?
We did. Actually, one of the things that I had brought up to the group was, hey, why don't we all create synopsis for one shots? And then we can choose who wants to do, what we like out of those, and then we'll run those.
That's a great idea. Dueling one-shots.
Exactly.
Nice.
Yeah, the whole thing. And we picked two, actually, because two of us finished our write-ups for our one-shots. And
there was a homework assignment, and only two of you turned it in.
But and what was interesting was I got to run one, and then the other one was actually Overwatch, who ran that one, and he did Savage World, which is the system. I hadn't played it.
I have never played Savage World either.
We didn't get to play a lot of it, but I got to see a lot of the combat. I got to see some of the stuff. It's different. It is totally different.
Cool.
And the way initiative works, we didn't get a lot of combat, unfortunately. But it uses a deck of cards for the initiative.
Oh, I like that.
And the way they talk about the players, like instead of calling them players, they call them something else. And like there's the, NPCs have a different kind of name because they're kind of that way. And then there's a whole nother class of characters. It's really interesting. It's it's just a different way of looking at it. We can dive into that like system knowledge later.
I'm definitely going to pick
take it a
little
look back. But no, it was neat. And even Chris getting into it got further like along with these, like, wow, there's a lot in here. So I think it was neat. It was neat. Character creation was super easy.
So what'd you run?
I ran Robotech, actually. I rolled all the way back to my original game system that I started with. So, you
used the actual Palladium rules? And
funny enough, I actually used not only Palladium rules, but I also grabbed a Palladium module. I played Ghost Ship.
So brave.
I went all the way back, but I gave it a little twist, just a little, and used the story arc circle to help me remember where everything is. Sure. And it actually came off flawlessly. We started at like 5 o'clock on one of the days and wrapped up at 3:30 in the morning.
Oh, wow.
It was
one of those old school all-nighters.
Yeah, and they were loving every moment of it, and the characters were fantastic. We even used Palladium rules for the optional rules of like, how old are you? How tall are you?
Oh, wow.
What's your disposition? And their dispositions were hilarious, and how they were related to each other was even funnier. So, yeah, it was good.
3d6 plus 10 years.
Not even. Actually, the way with Robotech is everybody's young in it. So 9 times out of 10, you're either like 17 to 19 or 20 to 30. Everyone else is like this slim chance that you're older.
Right.
And that was it. So everybody was super young. So.
Well, good. I'm really. It sounds like you guys had a great time. You did a lot of great role play and stuff like that. And sat up by the lake and just.
Oh yeah. We got to go kayaking. I got on a jet ski. It was fantastic.
Mark me envious.
Yes, and we'll be probably doing it again at some point. So keep your ears open. You might get a group invite for one of the day trips. So. Yep.
All right.
So you had a good week last week without me.
Yeah,
I caught.
Matthew Stewart Fulton,
Yeah.
the Mad Elf from our
Yes.
Discord server,
The soft-spoken Matt.
the soft-spoken Matt,
Yes.
in to help us work through some stuff.
You feel better? Do you feel like
I feel great afterwards.
Yeah.
I cried.
Oh, good. Did you
and-
talk about your mother or anything like that? I mean,
just all sorts of stuff.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
I had
Well,
some major breakthroughs, and
that's
we
good.
were good.
That's good. And that was all off air, so
Yeah. No, it was a delight having him in the studio.
No, it
And
sounded
so-
like you
so
guys
thank
you guys
again,
got
Matt.
through
Yeah.
a lot, and the disclaimers were high on the list, so that was good. That was
Right,
good.
right.
Totally necessary. But we have a new week,
Yeah, we have a new week.
not a
and
new topic.
Not a new topic though.
So, no, and I threw this one at you totally.
Which I was like, oh, thank God.
Yeah, it's like I left world building in here. I wonder what we're going to do, and I'm like, we're gonna do who. And sort of, and then like what? Like I created the show sheet, and I want to say like forgot about it promptly. Like I told you I was going to create the show sheet.
You told me you were going to create the show
I did
sheet,
not.
And then both of us kind of got wrapped up in work, and then I had a free moment, and I was like, well, let's see what he wrapped up on the show sheet just yet, and see where I need to start off. And I was like, what show sheet?
Exactly. And then
I guess he never got.
I
to
hop
it,
on,
you
and
know?
you've got like 5 paragraphs of stuff, and I'm like, well, apparently that was good enough.
Whoops, my hand slipped.
Whoopsie. So
yeah, we're gonna talk a little bit back more about world building tonight. So we're gonna kind of do a 201. Our first world building episode,
Yes.
episode 17, was more of an overview of just so here's a general world building sort of tips.
right.
And we kind of give you the 4-point structure of who, what, where, and when are the big questions you want to be addressing.
Like you're talking who, which is the societies and the people, the what, which is the cosmology, supernatural oddities, the where, which is the geography, landmarks, the biomes, the physicalness, if you will, the mundus, and then the when, which is the history, what shaped the world, how it came to be, or maybe even just the recent history that's important.
Sure.
Because you never know where you are.
What sets the stage?
And again, we're talking about world building. We're not talking about giant world building. We're not talking about tiny world building.
It's always within scope.
It's a scope.
Yeah.
So is it a high school? Is it a college? Is it a city? Is it a
small
country?
cluster of towns in the rural
Right.
countryside? It's
Is it a galaxy? Is it multiple galaxies? I mean, like Warhammer 40K is epic for a reason.
I still have a framed poster that came with my old BattleTech box set
Oh Lord.
that has a map of the inner sphere.
Yeah.
And I cannot count the number of planets that are, or systems, I should say.
Yeah.
And there may be multiple worlds in each one of those, systems.
Mostly conquered by the clans who came marching in until intergalactic AT&T decided to kick their
Until
butts.
space AT&T.
I love that line. That's all. What's funny
But
is
I digress.
we could totally dissect that in world building, and we still may.
And we
So,
still may.
Yeah, that may be like, I don't know, when we get up to the 300 level, we'll start dissecting worlds, and
Yeah,
we'll go
right
through
on,
that.
right on.
So, like,
But anyways, our grand plan here is to kind of go through the who, the what, the where, and the when of, and kind of delve into how to do each one of those in a little more detail.
or at least just to talk about it a little bit more.
Sure. So tonight we are starting with who.
Yeah.
We're talking about people, societies, and who we're populating our worlds with and what they're like.
Yeah.
So where do you want to start on this one?
This is a fine question because, like, when I'm really thinking about, like, when I think about worlds, I kind of stumble at certain points because my brain always goes to politics to start with,
Sure.
like who's in play. A lot of people go to power, and I use power in the mystical sense.
Sure.
And I think that really needs to be set aside for this discussion because that's really what.
That's a what.
That's
Yeah.
a what. That's not. So
That's
when
a
we're
what.
talking about people, we're talking about politics. And particularly, I usually see politics as 3 things that really drive them, and that's money, power, and fame.
Sure.
Whether or not it's one of those that is usually doing it, and then freedom is kind of the last one or lack thereof.
Right.
Because of one of the others. And sometimes it can be a driving force, but again, there's always a figure or some kind of point of reference. Whether that figure is esoterical, it's not actually a thing, it's a concept. They kind of express in a lot of different stories where you have like the Dread Pirate Roberts is a concept. It's a character who gets recreated again and again and again.
Oh, it's a mantle sometimes.
Correct.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
exactly. So you don't always have to have that. Kingship is one of those as well.
Sure.
But it is still driven by something. So a lot of times when I'm thinking about a political system, I always try and think of what drove the beginning of that. Was it a drive for power and control? Was it a drive for money where they were trying to hold it or they were trying to increase it? And again, wealth can be monetized in multiple ways. Like, don't think of it as gold or septums or anything like that.
Resources may be a better word for it. Yeah.
Right. And then fame.
He who controls the spice controls the universe.
Exactly. Because it is more than the money, that it is everything that it comes with the travel.
Right.
Nothing moves without spice.
Yep.
Comstar is a perfect example of that. It is the communication network. If you want to talk from this system to this system, Comstar is the only way.
You can either wait 78 years for your sublight radio transmission to go to get through to them, or Comstar's hyperpulse generator can send it there in 4 minutes.
Exactly. Or you, in theory, could ship someone there, but relativity in time really makes that challenging.
Time, and even shipping someone there physically can take up to a week and a half.
Exactly.
And even that's just one jump in battle talk.
Exactly. So, system to system, it's almost impossible at times.
Oh, yeah.
So that is a level of resource, I think, as well. And then you have fame, You have your people who are just like, I'm going to control everything, and show ownership. My face will be on every coin.
Sure.
Kind of thing.
Your megalomaniacs, your narcissists,
Medici,
demagogues,
those kind of characters. Now they kind of had a power run as well.
Sure.
But a lot of it had to do with just being known. There were a lot of individuals like Blackbeard. Was a notorious individual, but little is known other than he was bloodthirsty and crazy, which is untrue completely. He ruled by fame and power in that sense, that he was actually pretty decent as far as piracy goes. He never killed anybody he took as prisoner, period. He would dump them or tell them to join him. And he ended up with a very large fleet because of it. But he had fame, and that fame drove for more fame, and that worked out in the end.
There's a character from the old show Band of Brothers that I cannot remember the character's name now, but he's one of those, he's like a lieutenant or something like that in the or he's one of the higher ranks,
right?
Squad leader of some sort.
Sure.
And at one point later on in the series, there's always been rumors going around about him. Like the troops are always looking at him, going like, "Oh God, that guy's a complete badass." Like, did you hear he gunned down a bunch of like captive German soldiers?
Yeah, I remember you telling me about this guy.
And at one point, the commander of the squad takes him aside and is like, I've always heard them talking about you behind your back, and like you never stand up and defend yourself against anybody or anything like that. Why haven't you spoken up on your own behalf? And he's like, there are worse things than than everybody in the squad thinking that I am the biggest badass to ever strap boots on on this side of the country.
Exactly. It holds that position. So I always say, if you're working in a world, start with those base concepts. Think, hey, if I'm going to get into a political world, and that's going to be my first anchor point, regardless of what it looks like, and I want to start that paintbrush, start with, okay, why is it there?
Right.
What's the motivation behind it? What's the fear?
Here's a gathering of people. What have they gathered around? Who organized them to be a group of people in the first place?
What's that figurehead position? So, and that kind of leads to the second section, which was religion. And again, I'm not talking about what they're praying to.
Right. Gods are a what, not a who.
Correct. And I mean, they lend credence to what the religion is, but when I talk about religion, I literally are talking about the physical process of what traditions they are doing. What kind of steps do they take? Like, do they literally have churches and synagogues and a leadership structure and a pope at the top of it? And do they ordain the the politicians so that they can stay in power as well.
Or they're more of a holistic sort of religion,
right?
Look at like Shinto, where you'll have small shrines scattered about here and there, but there's no real like organized. Like you don't go to services. There's no
It's not an enforceable. There's
papacy.
There's no one creating a holy war, kind of a thing. That isn't a driving force of it. And I think that a lot of times when I put those together, one of the first things that I come to is, what do they fear? Or what are they asking for permission to do or permission against?
Yeah, when I was thinking about it, there's two reasons, essentially, the two main reasons. And I'm sure, inventive people will be able to find, other ones. But I think most worship of divine beings comes down to two things. It's either this God is good, and we want to venerate them.
Yep.
And we would like their favor because they will grant their favor upon those who venerate them.
Yep.
Or we fear this God because this God is bad, and we will prostrate ourselves before it in the hopes that it will not turn its wrathful eye on us.
Exactly. And I see that more of fear and permission.
Yeah.
Where it's like, I fear this God, or I ask for its permission to do its bidding, regardless of what it is.
Okay, fair enough.
So, and because of those two things, you can have a lot drive beyond that. So once you've defined whether those people fear or they're asking permission, I think that leads to a lot of what their practices might be and how big they might be and how they might set things up.
Sure.
So,
a lot of that structure too is going to come from the structure of your divines that they worship.
True.
So the big question I had with regards to religions, and again, this does kind of stray into the what.
Sure.
But I wish you to understand that what I'm about to say is from the perceptions of the people.
Correct.
Not the actual states. This may not actually be what's going on in your divine structure or your pantheon. Is a couple questions to ask in your world building is, first off, how many gods and what do they do?
Yeah.
How many gods do we perceive? What are their various bailiwicks? How do they play against each other?
Right.
Second is, do those gods have are they more forces of nature? Like my own world, they were literally just forces.
Do they walk?
You could not have a holy war because you can't holy war against the god of life because life exists. It just does. And death exists. Death is not evil. It's a thing.
Right.
War is a thing. Anytime there is conflict, the god of war was there to essentially that was his thing.
How are you going to war against the god of war?
Right.
Just love everybody?
Well, yeah. Well, first, you can't, because anytime two things come into conflict.
Right.
And that boiled down to even like a wolf eating a rabbit. That's a conflict. Somebody died.
That's death.
That's death. That's destruction, though.
Yeah.
That's conflict. That's war.
Right.
So there's without disassembling the very nature of life and how the world just functions on a daily basis, you can't take any of the gods in that pantheon out of the cycle.
Right. Now, on the other hand, and I'm just going to put this out there, you can have godless worlds with plenty of religion.
Oh, sure.
And I think that is where, because I've seen game systems and been in game systems where religion is heavy and they never discuss the gods whatsoever.
Yep.
And
Seven Sea is one of those.
Seven Sea is one of those.
You don't have
Theos is talked about heavily.
It's a major drive in the meta plot. I mean, the church is probably the biggest driving force in the entire plot.
And the prophets are all history. There is no. I mean, it's assumed by the passages that are in the Game Master section that you know what happened, but there is literally nothing to describe Theos, the god.
Right.
You don't know.
You never get his side of the story.
Not at all. And you don't know where he fits in, why the prophets only came about after a ton of history had passed. So it was like, okay, where did this come from? So I think that is a very fair world building experience, is that your gods can be, your worship can happen in I will say, godless world, not a powerless, but a godless world where they appear to be praying or they appear to be including a god.
Right. And that's not to say that those gods don't exist, but
No.
there's kind of two different types of gods. There's those who meddle and those who don't,
Yeah.
And regardless of belief, regardless of the existence, that God may just be hands off.
Right.
And letting your populace do as they do.
Mm-hmm.
And, again, not to say that they don't exist, but it's effectively godless and that they don't play a part in changing the landscape of your
Or they're
of
not
your
allowed
environment.
to.
Or they're not allowed to.
Yeah. Like a good one is if you go to crap, my brain's slowly dripping out my ear. Terry Pratchett's worlds. Death is a very prominent character. It actually has a daughter who's human, and she interacts with the world constantly. But he doesn't. His interaction with the world is limited to his views of death and him carrying the spirits away and when death occurs. But he is very much active in the world and very much a part of the world and doesn't become a physical manifestation until he has to be. And then he is only allowed certain things because he knows the rules better than anyone else of what he can and cannot do in each one of those roles. In the Hogfather, for instance, he has to actually take the mantle of the Hogfather. And as the mantle of the Hogfather, he can do miracles. And he saved a girl's life. And his follower, which is like this little smoking guy, basically is like, whoa, you can't do that. He goes, I can't do that, but the Hogfather can. It's a Christmas miracle, and there's a part where I think during one of them, I don't think it's the Hogfather, maybe another one, someone throws a bag of kittens out and they die. And he's upset. He is absolutely pissed off.
That's but
before
horrible.
he
Why
does
did you
anything
tell me
about
this
that,
story?
no, it's great because he opens up the bag and of course he's taking their souls. And before he lets the souls away, he plays with the kittens for souls for a while. He just fluffs them and cuddles them and
they climb all over him
exactly,
and claw up his robe.
Exactly. And then they go away. And it's because he gives a crap about humanity.
Yeah.
And so you get to know him as a character, but I mean, that's the kind of thing that you're talking about when we get to our next section, the what, is that you have to understand those people. But I think in the who, we need to know the people's view. We need to get that perspective. So I think you have to be careful of how much they really know, how much the who really know about their gods. Do they exist? Do they believe they exist? Is their belief enough that they exist? Because there's a whole race that I didn't even know about in D&D that literally it's this kind of weird frog people. Their belief creates gods. Yeah.
Oh, they are my favorite. Yes.
They literally their belief creates gods. And you could get them to believe that you're a god and turn you into one. I mean, it's really weird, but it's a possibility.
It's a possibility.
And so in that sense, do you have that race in your world? Is that where your gods came from? Was a bunch of frog people who just got scared about lightning and suddenly Thor shows up?
Right.
I mean, legitimately. So yeah, I think it's interesting. I think it's definitely a longer topic. I think religion is one of the harder topics that start to break into that what land. But I think it's a necessary topic in who, definitely.
Oh, absolutely. And it's depending on the part that you want it to play in your world, it can really shape your societies a lot. Arguably far more than like politics or anything like that. I mean, because it can generate the politics.
Oh, very much so.
We mentioned 7C. I mean, it's probably the biggest thing that generates the politics in that setting.
I would say it's a masking tool in a lot of ways too.
Sure, okay.
Where the religion gets used as a tool to exact things to happen.
Fair enough.
Like they do a twist on the Inquisition in it, where it's very dark, but there's some things happening behind the scenes with the Inquisition that is being driven by other politics because they don't want a king. Like if you look at the first edition of 7C, that history, they don't want a king of Spain right now. The existing king of Spain was actually kind of doing things they didn't like, so they kind of got rid of him, but now his brother, who should be king, isn't taking the mantle. And he can't because there's not enough cardinals to put a crown on his head because he has to be ordained by God. And so there's this gray thing going on and everybody's upset about it, but you're not sure who's controlling that. Which side? Is it the religious side that's not letting it happen? Or is it a political side that's playing a move to say we don't want him to be king and that'll change the outcome of this war? So it's very gray.
Yeah.
And it's neat that you have those kind of factions playing against each other, which I know you wrote like literally 5 paragraphs on,
I did.
which I love, honestly, all this stuff you wrote, and it's accurate. And I think stepping into that next section is important because a lot of times we think of politics and we think of religion, but those are placeholders in the world. Those are larger concepts. You have people who follow those faiths and follow those religions without being, or follow those political means without being part of a faction per se.
Right. Those are a lot of those times that that could just kind of be background flavor and stuff like that. But where your societies are really going to start shining is when you start making factions.
Yeah.
And factions can be really anything. It can be the government is a faction.
Yep.
Or it could be a subset of the government like the army of the government.
Right.
You know? And so you're going to have factions within factions within factions.
Right.
And even like within the army, you might have the Navy SEALs or something like that. You know, I know I'm screwing up our own structure here.
Again,
so
keep going.
Apologies to our active military. I'm just throwing out names here.
Yep.
You know, but you're going to have a smaller group like the SEALs within the Navy, within the U.S. government. You know,
right.
And then
exactly
in the middle of that, you've got SEAL Team 6.
Sure.
Well, they're not SEAL Team 5. They're not SEAL Team 7. You
Right.
know?
Right.
And they're going to have their own stuff going on.
Right.
So a couple things we need for factions. The very, very, very first thing we need for a faction. What is the function of that faction? What does it do? Why does it exist in the first place? What are their goals?
Goals are always important when you look at a faction.
Super important.
Simple goals.
Okay. So, just overall. So is their goal external? Are they trying to like build something or spread an idea? Are they trying to act outwardly upon the world, essentially? Or just generally help the public? Or are they oppositional? Are they trying to stop a specific group from completing their goal? Are they trying to prevent a certain event? Like, is this a ancient cult that's trying to keep an eldritch god from rising?
Perfect
and actively
example.
working against them?
Der Kreuzritter in 7th Sea is a group of, you could call them knights, but they are not just knights, but they are a faction that goes into the place in between, and which is this kind of gray realm, and stop the horrors from coming through that have come through the wall, if you will, that encroach on the prime plane, and these are anything from like these bug-like creatures to other monstrosities that make their way to Thea, the world, and walk around, and they're literally there to be the guardians of that space.
I'm pretty sure my 7th Sea character qualifies as one of those things.
Possibly.
But we'll have that discussion elsewhere.
Yes.
But anyways, yes. So are they just do they just generally have a goal to, you know, help people or hurt people or acquire wealth or something like that, or is it like more specific in that they're trying to counteract something or specifically another group?
Yeah.
There are some groups that are made specifically to just be the antithesis of another group.
The Musketeers, they're the guard of the king, but they are not the king's guard.
Right.
So
their oppositional group is any enemies of the king.
Right, and the people, and to protect the people. Like, it's always interesting. We protect the king and the people.
Yep.
And it's like, okay, do we protect the people from the king when necessary? Oh, okay, that's an intriguing way of putting it. And that's the truth, is that you have to kind of watch that line.
Sure.
And that's important with your goal, to make sure that the goal is simple enough that it defines the conflict that they deal with.
So one thing you always have to make sure is, does that goal make sense?
Right.
Okay, now it may have a lot of nuance to it.
Always.
But protecting people, protecting the king, sometimes from each other, makes sense.
It does.
Absolutely. You got to have order, you got to have structure in the world, and they're there to make sure that that happens.
Right.
Okay. So I guess the big thing I wanted to put this point in here for is you've got a lot of these like you want to put cults in that want to bring about the end of the world.
Sure.
Okay, cool. We've discussed this before though. Why?
Yeah.
Why do you want to end the world? It sounds scary, but ultimately it's self-defeating because You keep all your stuff there? You live
That's
there?
where I keep all my stuff.
Are you just trying to commit mass suicide? I mean, because if you destroy the world, guess what? You're in the world.
Well, unless your whole goal is to ascend to godhood, and that by doing so you
Right.
get to sit with the pantheon.
So that's why I say it's an ultimately self-defeating goal outside of external context.
Correct.
So yeah, there may be good reasons to destroy the world, but if your goal is just destroy the world, maybe rethink that one. Maybe come up with a greater context that would justify destroying the world.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. No, we can do that.
Mm-hmm.
But let's just make sure that we're thinking it through and that it makes sense at the end of the day.
Yep.
Why are we destroying the world? Let's have a good answer for that.
Right.
And not just destroying the world, but there's a lot of other, goals and stuff like that. Like, oh, they just fight people. Why? Why are they fighting people?
Yeah.
Because they're bad guys. Okay, I get that. But what are they trying to accomplish with it? Let's make it make sense.
Yeah.
How do they go about pursuing the goal?
That's always a hard one. It seems easy, but it's actually exceptionally hard to figure out.
Because you start getting into a lot of the methodology. And my typical process for really just about any of these questions is just start asking why.
Mm-hmm.
Just be your own annoying little kid
Mm-hmm.
that wants to know everything.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so they want to end the world.
Why?
Why? Because they serve a dark god out of fear, as we mentioned before, that if they help this dark god destroy the world, they will ascend to godhood beside him and not suffer the ill fate of being in his path.
All right.
Okay, that's a why.
Sure.
That's a why. Okay, so how are they going to go about bringing about the end of the world? They're going to unlock 4 seals.
Why?
Why? Because these 4 seals are the things that are binding their dark god.
Why?
Because another faction put those seals in place
Why?
to lock away this god because there were 5 gods in the beginning and he's one of the 5 pieces at the end of the world.
Okay, I'm going to stop you right there.
Et cetera, et cetera,
Like,
et cetera.
literally, your world is getting really complex.
I know. But that's how these things get written.
No, I agree with you.
And you can stop at any time, really.
Sure.
But you just keep asking why.
Yeah.
And anytime you can't come up with an answer for it, that's a hole.
Yeah.
Okay? Because if you don't ask why, your players will ask why.
Oh, I assure you they will. And
They
the other thing you need to be
absolutely will.
prepared for is if the why is dumb, if the why is simple and dumb, there is probably a good chance that your players will do something equally as dumb to make them realize that it's dumb.
Yep.
Like if it just takes one leader to be like, uh-oh, I dropped the one thing we need, the crystal shard, into lava. Well, I guess that's it.
I guess that's it.
That's the end of it.
Whole world's screwed. Okay.
Yep. Yep. Did Isildur actually throw the thing in the lava? Well, that pretty much just ends the whole show. Like, no, I want to keep this power. Do you realize what that's going to do to you? You know it's the ultimate level of corruption. You saw what happened to the other kings. You know, you're right. You're right. Right over the shoulder. Let's go get a beer.
Yep. Story over.
Story over.
Saved us a lot of time.
That's right.
And about,
Where are those eagles?
and about 9 hours of 9 to 12 hours of film.
That's correct. That's correct.
So anyways, how do they go about pursuing their goal? Is things like, are they public? Are they secretive?
What's their ethics?
Do they have a public face,
Yeah.
but only reveal their methods or intentions to their members?
Ooh.
You know, are they
Do they use other hands?
right? Are we? We're a public service organization. We're all here for good. No, okay. So you're a member now? No, seriously, we are like the night blades who, skulk around in the shadows. And oh wow.
Or do they not even realize how evil they are?
Right? Do they have
I
factions
love-
within the factions?
I
Do they have
love
a
when
public face
players
that's-
are inside the greatest do-gooders world, and then they realize it's actually the bad guys. No matter how you look, but the dental is so good. They give me time with my family. Do you know what my maternity leave is like here?
Yeah, yeah.
So,
What are their methods? That's another one. Are they peaceful? Are they warlike?
Yep.
Are they political?
it's a good question.
Are they, are they just trying to maneuver the bigger pieces around them to achieve their goals? Are they willing to use unscrupulous methods?
Yep.
They may be good guys, but are they willing to maybe beat somebody up for, if he's a bad guy?
Right.
Are they willing to maybe assassinate a bad guy?
Right.
Or is it how bendable are these rules?
Mm-hmm.
And the other big question is are there other factions or groups that align with their goals that they're willing to work with?
Yep.
Because that almost becomes part of the faction then. If you know that anytime you run into faction A, you're going to run into faction B.
Yeah.
Or at least faction B is going to be supporting them in some way. That's another aspect of that faction.
Yeah, I mean, if you let's break down a very simple analogy. Sherwood Forest is a world.
Okay.
It has people in it.
Yep.
It has a kingdom.
Yep.
It has two primary factions.
Yep.
And they both have drive. We know their ethics, but that changes no matter how you're telling that story. And we've seen it multiple ways. We've seen the Errol Flynn. We've seen the Men in Tights. We've seen Robin Hood.
Prince of Thieves.
Prince of Thieves. We've seen the most recent. I don't know if anybody's seen the most recent one. That's like a John Woo movie. But like seriously, each one of those shows it in a little different light. It's the same world. It's the same factions. It's the same story. It's the same head characters. Yet every time the story is told, there's a little bit change to the ethics.
Yep.
There's a little bit of change to the methodologies. Musketeers is the same way.
Yep.
Like that, it's a story that's been told a million times. But again, the world doesn't have to be large. You just have to know the goals of your factions. And that's why, like, in Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, like, yeah, they're all following this false king on the one side. The sheriff. And that just seems really weird, because what is the motivation of the hundreds of guards? Why are they doing what they're doing? I mean, I know Robin's men. Like, they're literally fighting for their lives, their homes. They're trying not to be robbed on a daily basis.
Sure.
And then you've got this bandit king that isn't the king. The actual king is away and probably will come back at some point. Why are all these people just super loyal to this jerk?
No, I mean, if we want, it may not have been expressed in the movie, but if you want me to do a little shooting from the hip,
Sure.
Okay, so he keeps them in power.
Okay.
They experience more freedom and more power and more leeway to pursue their own goals, shall we say?
Sure.
Be bigger jerks, bully the people, and
Own more land.
own more land, things like that under the Sheriff of Nottingham.
They kind of showed it in Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves with the church.
Kind of gets to live fat and sassy under his rule.
Yeah. And so I think that's one of the things. I mean, when you're asking those questions, sometimes you're not exposing everything that you know as a storyteller. When the bad guys show up and they come to, they're coming in droves, literally, to kill your characters because they're working for the, the resistance group. You're near, and people are like, why are these guys just throwing their lives away? And plus, they've got tons of money on them and all kinds of equipment. And got it.
Yep.
Okay, so it's power begets power begets power, and some people just want to be in that. So that gives you a kind of ethical view of what those people might be like, even on the inside.
Yep.
So again, worlds don't have to be the same scale. Think about it. Think about how they work.
All right, so I'm glad you brought up the Sheriff of Nottingham.
Yes, he's a perfect example for your next time.
So who founded the group?
In this case, the Sheriff of Nottingham.
Okay, now this is important.
Right.
Okay, not even if that particular character is long dead and gone.
Yes.
Okay, you want to know who founded the group. Okay, doesn't terribly much matter who this is, but what that informs is why the group was founded in the first place. Okay, what was the person who founded it like? And therefore, it will inform like what ideas or visions the founder initially had.
Right.
Okay. What was the driving goal? And then you start getting into a little bit of group history. Okay. And so within groups, even small groups, large groups, doesn't matter. Within groups,
right, you
tend to have two movements that happen within the group. Okay. One is a movement of conservatism or orthodoxy.
Right.
Okay. Which is going to try to adhere as closely as possible to the original founding leaders.
The edicts.
The original founding ideals of that group.
Right.
Okay. And then you're going to have a second movement of liberalism or reformism, which will say that times change. reasons change. Maybe the initial
Interpretations?
interpretations change. Maybe the original reasons 300 years ago when this group was founded don't exist anymore or don't exist in the same form, and we need to change with the times to adapt to those.
Right.
Or maybe there are new outside influences that are acting upon us, and we don't have the founder did not foresee that happening, so we need to adapt to react to it.
Right. They didn't scope it out that far. There was an ideal that kind of kicked through, and this kind of makes sense, is that there was the guildsmen, and the guildsmen were basically the warriors who came back from the war, the guardsmen who were done being guards, like they got to a retirement age, and they created the guildsmen, and the guildsmen were basically people who would teach other fighters and get them up. The problem was that the statute was they had to be part of the guildsmen guildsmen masters were always guys who had gone to the first war.
Well, what happens when that generation dies off?
What happens when there isn't a war for a generation?
Right.
So they had to figure out how to change that to, well, anyone who would retire from the military, which again, some people hadn't gone to war but had retired from being warlike, and that created a very interesting divide of what they believed the organization should be like.
Sure.
So I think one of the other things you have to look at while you're talking about this and talking about these factions is, how long has it been? What influences and pressures have gone back and forth in that organization?
Because things can stray an awful lot over time. And now this doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have faction infighting or anything like that, or that these need to be clearly defined sub-factions of the conservatives or the liberals within the faction or anything like that.
Right.
But what it does for you is it defines a scope of the polar extremes of interpretation of that group's values.
Yes.
And then when you start creating characters and plots having to do with that faction, you can then put them within that spectrum depending on where you need them to be.
So a good example, I'll throw out this one that not a lot of people are aware of because it's 7th C, number 1 and number 2. It's GM stuff, is Novus Order Mundi, which is the New World Order, was created just after the powers came to be. And actually there's from the senators of the original bloodlines. So where Sorte and where Strega and where Pyramid, all the fire magic, where all that came from was these people making a deal effectively with demons.
Okay.
And those original bloodlines created Novus Order Mundi as the seats, and then generations replaced them as they went up. It has been a while since then. Like think Roman to Renaissance time.
Oh, wow, yeah.
So a lot of generations, some of the people who sit on those seats don't have the original ideals of the original people, but they sit on literally the most powerful secret council on the planet. So how do they change power? How do they change the ideals of the entire group, even though they sit on the most powerful council? They can't sit across from somebody who's literally world hungry and say, we should really be examining things differently because of X is now an influence, and we need to start doing that, or we need to expand to a new world, or we need to do this, and, some of the people on the council don't have those same beliefs.
Yep.
So it's that continuation of what happens, what breaks down, what rebuilds, what power struggles, not directly murdering each other even, but the individual struggles that can occur.
Sure.
So
I'm glad you brought up the whole guards guilds thing.
Yep.
Okay.
I'm getting
Feeds
good at this.
I don't know. You were feeding right into this fire.
Thanks.
So the next one, how does this faction recruit?
What are they?
I mean, a faction's a group of people, but you need new people eventually, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like Men in Black is another good example. Like if no one knows you exist, how do you recruit?
Exactly. Okay. So how selective are they about their membership? Are they open to new members and volunteers? Like, do they just literally hold a job fair and just be like, hey, do you want to join the Fighters Guild?
With honors.
Or do you scout potentials and approach them proactively?
Yep.
What criteria might this group look for in a potential member? So what does the ideal member look like? Best of the best with honors, sir.
Yep.
Exactly. And that might not always be evident. I think Men in Black is a great example,
especially of a secret organization. And I think in storytelling, it's an incredible example because it was a faction started in a government-funded way, but then took on its own life because it's not just one government.
Yep. And I would say the recruiting scene is great for this because what you're initially presented with this, here's a bunch of military experts and an NYPD cop.
Right.
And we're going to put you in a firing range with loaded firearms, and we want to see what what you can do. And so it's presented to you as this very we're looking for someone with military might and prowess. And then Edwards, I believe is the character's name, goes in there and shows his stuff and his judgment, and that's actually what they were looking for. He was stuck in a room full of people firing indiscriminately at what they saw as monsters, and Edwards was the only person who thought about what was going on.
Yep.
And they were like, no, that's the quality. Okay. Yep. So think about that with your factions. What are they looking for? And do the members of those factions, are they good members, bad members, Let's see here. What are their initiation rites?
Oh, Lord.
Does a new recruit just need to prove themselves in some way? Is there a formal ceremony? Is there an induction thing? Or is it just, hey, congrats, you're hired, show up on Monday?
The faceless ones is an interesting example of that as well. You have to lose yourself in the initiation.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that was a really neat story to have that person completely lose themselves. And at the end, she wasn't even broken by that. She knew exactly who she was.
Yeah.
And yet she could do anything they could do. Probably better. But it was that she transcended it.
Yep.
She did something that they weren't prepared for.
But like in my game, you've got the Black Lion Gang.
Oh, yeah.
And their initiation rites have largely to do with beating the pulp out of their new members and then telling them that's the last person that will ever lay a finger on them because they're now the hunters, not the hunted.
There was an initiation at Kanar that was like that.
Yep.
Yeah, a terrible life role-playing game where basically when you became a knight, every one of the knights would hit you.
Yep.
And they would say that was the last time I will ever lay a hand on you, kind of a thing. And it was an interesting initiation.
Yep. That may have been sitting in the back of my head.
Interesting.
That's
we'll play.
But real world gangs do this as well.
It's very common.
Little things like that though. So things to think about for your factions. And lastly, are the members bound to membership in some way?
For life.
Do you have a contract? Is there a sacred oath you take? Are you magically bound?
Yep.
Are you implanted with a microchip if you're playing a futuristic game or something like that? Does that microchip have a small mini explosive? Is it located in the back of your brain?
Yep.
Things like that.
Unlimited power, by the way, it's also an explosive. But we're going to move on from that.
Or conversely, are you free to leave at any time?
Yeah.
Can you quit your job,
Yeah.
Is there a penalty for leaving the faction, i.e. you can walk away, but you're blacklisted. You'll never work in this town again.
Yep.
Or, you might be hunted. Yeah, you can walk away, but the only way to leave this faction is in a body bag, and we'll make sure that happens.
Yeah. Or, and again, you can have simpler ones than that. Like I'm reading a comic right now that's loosely based, I wouldn't say loosely, it's strongly based upon the Greek gods. And one of the Greek goddesses, or lesser goddesses, we'll say demigoddesses, is part of a all-female order of virgins. And you have to be a virgin to be in it. And one of the gods basically looked at her and said, because he can tell, it's just like, wait, you're not a virgin anymore. Do they know this? Are you fully aware of this kind of a thing? Or you want to tell me how it happened, honey? Kind of a thing. And it wasn't good. Let's just leave it at that because it's gods, and gods are terrible people. But no, really, seriously.
Gods are the worst.
Gods are the worst. So, but again, that was just a way to distinguish and her not wanting to tell anyone, and she has to get out of it now.
Yep.
Out of that order.
Yep.
And what's funny is they paid for her schooling. So she has to figure out how she's going to pay him back.
Oh, right.
for what she did.
So, no, those are all great things to think about in a faction, though.
Yeah.
All right, so that moves us on to our last one. And it's just more or less, this is your window dressing one here. What sort of structure and iconography does the faction have? So, do they have uniforms? Do they have a symbol? Do they wear that symbol?
What is their symbolism?
Right. Do they have a fancy name?
Oh yeah.
Are they just the army, or are they the silver spears of Lothric?
Ooh, nice.
Something like that.
I like that.
Maybe they're granted an official mark, like a coat of arms by the nobility,
Right.
which validates them.
The strings of Aerosmith.
Yeah, the platinum strings of Aerosmith.
There you go.
Are they a branch of the government, or are they secretive? And do they eschew symbols and names and icons?
yeah. We are nothing.
Yeah, the voiceless ones.
Oh man, yeah.
They all wear masks and disguises. Some of them may not even know who the rest of that faction is.
That's right.
I
I mean, like the Death Eaters in Harry Potter.
Death Eaters are a great example. They all wear
have
masks.
They have the thing on their arm that's permanent, but it can call others.
The Mask Lords of Waterdeep.
Oh yeah.
in
Totally
Faerun.
forgot about them. Yeah. Sorry. Never forget the Mask Lords of Waterdeep.
And what are the meanings of those icons and symbols and names and stuff like that? So it's just a little thought. I mean, you may come up with a cool name like the Silver Spears of Lothric that I just kind of put out the top of my head.
Right.
But why are they called the Silver Spears? Just think about that for a second. You don't need to come up with an elaborate history that's 15 pages long, but just like they all wield silver spears because silver is a symbol of purity, and they're supposed to be like paladins.
Yeah.
Period.
Yep. Or is it all a lie?
Yeah. Or is it all a lie? Exactly.
Yep.
Is it completely a front?
Yeah. Why do you guys call yourself the Silver Spears? You're a bunch of murderers. Because it sounds really good.
Because it sounds freaking impressive.
Yeah, everybody's just like, everybody wants to invite the Silver Spears, but nobody would want to invite Dale and his murdering band of gang.
Yeah, yes. Band of bandits, yes.
Yeah, like that's just a bad idea. Like you don't go with that.
Exactly. Okay, so what organization do they have?
Yeah.
Do they follow a single leader? Are they led by a council? Are there ranks within the faction? Mm-hmm. Is it like a single leader with a couple lieutenants who each have a squad of people, something like that?
Is it a college where you have like a headmaster and then you have other people underneath that?
Sure, maybe
and
departments.
And the only way you get higher rank is when one of them die, but they're all like, they all live forever. Terry Pratchett did this, where basically all of the wizards, the only way you got your hat was when another one passed, and that hat passed on to the next power.
Yep.
So it's a way that you can move up the ranks by people dying or being killed off.
And to touch back on our religion thing earlier, is the leader of your faction technically a higher power?
That's true. That's true.
Churches essentially are factions that serve a single leader,
the Pope.
And that single leader is potentially a god.
Mm-hmm.
In more, I would say, mundane organizations, you'll have something like a pope who speaks for that god instead.
Right. Well,
but it's quite possible that the leader of your faction is a divine being,
without a doubt,
of some sort.
Mm-hmm.
And then lastly, how does one progress through the ranks, like you brought up earlier? Do you have to wait for someone of higher rank to die,
or do you have to wait for battle?
Yeah. Are you elevated through distinguished service?
Yep.
Are you elevated by achieving a specific goal? Maybe it's an assassin's guild, and when you've got your 10th confirmed kill, you become a master assassin.
There you go.
And not just an apprentice.
Or even just a full member of the guild.
Sure.
Yep.
Are you chosen by a higher power for ascension? In that church-like structure, does that God reach down and say, "You are one of my faithful"?
Chosen.
Yeah. You're now my chosen one. Or field promotion. Previous leader was killed.
Yep.
Or maybe even killed by you.
Exactly.
You keep what you kill.
Yep. Them necromongers.
Exactly.
Can get kind of scary at the end there if you sweep in and make that kill before somebody else.
Yep.
That happens.
So a lot of things to think of. And that's just kind of off the top of my head.
Yeah. No, I like it. I think this was good.
Yeah, absolutely.
We have a buttload of questions in like 5 minutes, but I think some of these will need to be moved off.
Oh God, I didn't even see the time. We do have like 5 minutes for these. Okay.
Yeah. So
some of these will probably get moved off.
I'm going to straight off say to some people, we're gonna Ilya May, we're moving your question because I love your question.
Love your question.
But your question needs to be shifted off because we're going to eventually get to history stuff. So I'm not even going to read the question. We'll be moving your
history
question off.
Is its own episode. Your answer will be an entire episode about 3 episodes from now.
Yeah. Technolich, I'm actually going to kind of move yours off as well to our next episode.
Is it about the clerics and deities?
It is. And I liked the question. Again, I think it fits better in that one.
It's an amazing question, but yeah, I think that's going to be something we discuss in maybe our next episode.
I think it will be our next episode. I think it's moved through. Yeah.
Yep.
So I'm going to actually jump over to Overwatch.
Okay.
World building regrets. Have you ever added something to your setting that you wished you hadn't? Did you retcon it, roll with it, or DM around it?
I can't think of a specific, but I'm sure it's happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say probably my most potent reaction to it is to DM around it. Try to minimize its impact on the plot. Make hope the players forget it, and start trying as a DM to justify it. Start asking a lot of those why questions, and make it fit by coming up with better plot reasons to pad around it, so that it suddenly starts making sense.
In my D&D game for you guys, the long, super long one, I'd actually included a god in it that was a driving reason for something to happen. And then literally as I was going through, I realized it didn't work in the plot as well as I wanted it to. So I literally took something that one of the players said that made more sense and switched it, and it worked flawlessly. Because I hadn't thought about it far enough to realize that this faction would have way more power than the god that was working with them. So I literally just basically said, oh, so effectively this god who's trying to manipulate these people to do this, there's someone else who's basically saying, oh, I see what you're trying to do there. By the way, I'm going to become a god. Thank you for all the help.
Nice.
And sidestep the whole process.
Nice.
So, I've done that. I did retcon it a little bit, but more so I rolled with what made sense. And it's amazing how the players can make sense out of something that you didn't quite think in the right direction.
Yep.
So, yeah, totally agree with that one.
Your players always believe that what you wrote was intended. And that's just how your world works. So if you do put something in crazy like that, they'll justify it. They'll oftentimes very much justify it.
I'm thinking we jump to the next one down from Techknowledge.
I'm following your lead on this one.
Do you find it better to model new races off existing ones or start from scratch? That's a great question.
That's a big question.
I am going to say yes and no. I think it really depends on what my motivation was in the world. Sometimes you need to create a race. Sometimes you need to look at less about its details and more about what it means to the world or what it means for itself. For instance, if you've got a race of cats, right? Where did they come from? Like, why are they humanoid? Like, where did that come out of? Was it a genetic mistake? Was it an evolution? Are they still cats at heart? Meaning, are they lions? Are they cougars? Are they lazy?
Or are they the natural evolution and we're the weird pink hairless ones?
Exactly. So I would say always be aware of why you're putting them in the world. If you just think it's a cool race from another thing, extract it. Just pull it right out and then literally work on why they're there after the fact, because it's a lot easier to do that. And I think that's a great way of doing things, especially if you're playing with existing templates like D&D or 7th Sea or something like that. But if you're literally only taking the rule set and then you're going to manipulate from that point forward, like you've done with the Elder Scrolls stuff, I would say evaluate why they're in the world and then see if you can find a race from the game creation that you're basing it on, and see if it'll help you shift them into position.
Sure. My answer differs slightly.
Okay.
In that,
how dare you?
Okay, so basing them on an existing race is easier, but is arguably worse.
I agree.
So it is easier. Bringing up my Elder Scrolls game again. When there are a lot of players in my game that were not terribly familiar with the world.
Right.
And so when I was telling them who the Red Guard were and who the Nords were and stuff like that, I initially wanted to get very big into like the history of Skyrim and Yokuda and who the Yokudans were, and then you kind of cut me off and was just like, the Red Guard are stylized Arabian, the Nords are stylized Vikings. Period. And those are completely accurate representations of those races.
Yep.
Stylized Arabian. Boom. That's Red Guard for you.
Yep.
They do have a lot of other history and stuff like that, but that's lore.
And once you're in the game, you get past the visual aspect of it.
Right.
And move on.
So it's easier to base it off an existing race because we spoke before about suspension of disbelief.
Correct.
And how hard you have to try to imagine the strange thing being described to you. So if I give you an anchor point like they're stylized Arabians, you can think of what your stylized Arabian culture is. You can reach back to the Mummy, you can reach back to the Arabian Nights, Aladdin, all those things, and say, okay, I kind of got an idea for what a Red Guard is. But It is worse because our own history and racism and politics feed then into this fantasy idea.
Yep.
And you may have the best intentions in the world, but when you're like, I'm Polish. I grew up in a very white suburbanite family. I did not have a lot of interaction with Middle Eastern people growing up. I still do not have a good idea about what that culture is actually like.
Right.
Okay. So if I were to try to stylize something off of there, I would be coming off of a lot of assumptions and a lot of stereotypes, and that can lead to a lot of very bad writing.
Right.
So be careful.
Yes.
But depends on how far you're willing to make your players reach for their ideas of what that race is.
Sounds good. I think we're done.
Everything else, with apologies, I know there were a lot of questions. We're going to have to put them off till next week.
We'll hit them.
Or future episodes. Like I said,
you'll definitely get it.
you get an entire episode to answer your questions.
Yes. So next week, we're going to be doing world building. What is this going to be? 202?
Oh, there's also the Mad Elf. Yeah, we got to put him off.
We'll do that as well. So 202 is going to be we're going to get into what? Cosmology, supernaturals, and oddities. What kind of gods and powers are out there? So if you will, Kate, bring us in. You can find us on @ST_conclave at Twitter. And watch for those pinned posts to find our Discord, or on Instagram at @ST_conclave when we decide to post things. Mm-hmm. Our Discord also is listed there in our Twitter with the episode description, and you can help our people and join us in all the conversation.
I want to thank big shout out to our Patreon members, specifically Knox in the Box. Thank you so much for contributing to the ongoing continuation of the show. We very much appreciate that, and hope we're giving you the content that you're looking for.
Thank you.
Our intro music is Beyond the Warriors by Glee Frog. Our outro music, which you're hearing now, is Only Our Footprints in the Sand by Midair Machine. You can find all these tracks and more on freemusicarchive.org.
We record here at Podcast Detroit, which you can find at podcastdetroit.com or on Twitter at Podcast Detroit. Our lovely engineer is Kate, and she takes wonderful care of us, and you should always come down here if you want to do a once-a-month thing. You can join them in, and there's also a free podcast that you can do. We'd also like to thank our families. Vicky, Sean, thanks for letting us be here, and all of our friends who game with us.
And you, our listeners, thank you, we love you, and good night.
Good night.